Good morning, guys. It's the morning of May 20th, 2022, and I just want to share with you some updates and some observations around the different food forest areas that have been planted out over the last 2 years here. So there's about 4 different areas that I want to show you guys. One of them is out there. You can actually see right now, it's a really simple agroforestry system where we've interplanted existing mandarins with bananas and eucalypts right in front of some persimmons, which you can see are going. The leaves are turning. Then there's a really high density system, which you can actually maybe just see right over there. We'll send the drone up in a second. You can see the high density agroforestry system. It's just finishing its 2nd season of growth. And then there's the backyard system here, which this is just, more of a backyard system, more perennial herbs, leafy greens, things that you'd want closer to the back door. And this is just finishing its 1st season, so this is about 8 months in the ground. So we'll go in and take a quicker, a little bit more of an in-depth look at each of those systems, and yeah, let's check it out. So we'll actually just start from up here because you can see things pretty easily, but a lot of what you're looking at here are the support trees. The long-lived things, the long-term fruit trees are still kind of buried in, and you can't see them, especially because we're getting ready for frost here. And last year, the frost absolutely smoked all of the bananas that were uncovered and didn't have much shelter. And so this year, one of the biggest learnings was higher density with those fast-growing support trees, namely the eucalypts, the tree lucerne, and some acacias. So that's what we've gone extra hard with, and you can see that reflected in the newest iterations of the agroforestry systems out in the orchard as well. So that's mostly, it's really, really dense here, but that's mostly with the support trees. We'll go down and take a look at some of the fruit trees that are under there, but this is how it's going to stay all through winter. We're not going to chop things down because then we're going to expose more to the frost. So we've cut open just enough a few weeks ago to let a bit more light in. So it's not fully shaded back there, but that's how it's going to stay until spring. So that same banana where we're looking at, this is a dwarf Cavendish, and it's surrounded by a border of yacon, and you can see a ton of things just get chopped and dropped into the middle. There's some French sorrel that I'm absolutely in love with. That's why it's so small, because it hardly gets to grow any before I eat it. It's a really lemony flavor. There's also this back here, which I believe is, I'll have to check. I think it's Cuban basil, something like this. I'll put it in the description. But yeah, that's kind of the pattern, is a border of yacon. There's some papayas in here. There's an ice cream bean. This is a eucalypt right here. The tree lucerne. There's some citrus in here. There's a pomegranate. There's mulberry. There's a bit of Mexican sunflower on the edges. And similar with that row, it's just a bit more exposed, less tender things. We've got the bonnegrass in the back here, but same thing with the tree lucerne and the young eucalypts. This is all about 8 months growth, and after a number of pretty intense chop and drops during the season. So let's get out here. So for those of you who don't know, basically the idea is we're converting an existing orchard. It's a polyculture orchard, which means there's a bunch of different crops all over the place, but it's still very orchard, i.e. trees and grass, nothing in between. So we're kind of going in and retroactively filling in with really high density, high diversity, and depends on the context, right? If you have a big space, what we've done here, this was the biggest space, and we've done a really high intensity, large agroforestry system here. But in some areas it's a bit smaller, or you can just get away with interplanting. So different strategies for different locations, but this is how we're doing here. So this area behind me, I can find some footage or some old photos, but this was all grass and 4 sad young avocado seedlings about 1.5 years ago, right? And so that's when my learning and journey into agroforestry really began. I did a workshop, a course with Permadynamics up in Northland, and then since then have just been taken off with the learning and meeting other people and online interactions with people. Now there's a lot of really inspirational projects all around the world, here in New Zealand and Australia and the US. That I'm really looking at. I'm communicating with people in each of those countries. In Brazil especially, there's so many valuable resources out there to help guide how you do things, and some good ideas, and just experimenting. So really making an effort to connect with the community around this stuff, and because that's how you build your knowledge. So let's jump in. You can see my breath. So it is cold here. It's the 20th of May, and at this stage we have about a month until the first frost happened last year. We haven't had any major frosts this year so far, just a really light one. things were fine for the most part. But we got our first really hard frost about a month from now last year. So we're kind of in preparation stage. I've planted things to get ready for that, which you'll see. But we're not doing any more pruning. We did our last heavy prune, and you might say it's still a bit open, especially compared to the backyard system where it was a lot more dense, more bushy. We're not here at this stage, or that's not how it is here. We've done a bit more pruning, but because I'm confident that these bananas will come back, because last year everything got smoked and pretty much all of it came back, from the papayas to the bananas to the lucuma, even some of the cherimoyas. Really interesting with the cherimoyas. I bought about 6 grafted cherimoyas, which was a bit expensive. Almost all of them died and didn't come back. The ones that did come back were the seeds that I planted. The seedlings that I planted in the ground, almost all of those came back after being frosted, whereas the grafted ones just got smoked. And so that's my inclination, to keep going with my instinct and just put seeds in the ground. That patience will pay off, especially where there's a bit more of a marginal climate. So things are looking good. I've got the passion fruit now on a bamboo stake trained across the row. So the idea is it'll jump into each of the canopies, kind of climb all around. The eucalypts as our emergent layer here. The passion fruit's climbing a tree lucerne. A few of the other support trees that we're using are the acacia or the brush wattle. Those are really easy to come across on the roadside. Seeds from trees, seedlings. We're using paulownia as well. This one has lost its leaves, but it's also an incredibly fast growing tree. The loquat also has been a really impressive tree, and it keeps its foliage in winter. It's got really tough foliage, and so that might be a really easy choice for some of you who are in more marginal climates. You can see this is what the paulownia look like when they're losing their leaves, but they grow outrageously quickly. Tree lucerne, eucalypt, banana, and in the understory, a lot of the seedlings, the high value seedlings, are in these areas that are planted a year and a half ago. The seedlings are now about knee height. You can see right here we've got seedling loquats. We've got these guavas right here. We've got to see another guava. This is a really heavy guava row actually. There's macadamia seedlings in here. I'll flip this around so we can take a look. So if you look down the row, this is actually the oldest row. This is about a year and a half. This is the end of its second growing season. This is one of the recent rows from this year. This is about 8 months old, and you can tell it's got not as much stratification. Next year things will really start to separate, but for now it's just really compact and tightly, like really dense in this one space. Whereas after another year, things do start to stratify and get a bit easier and more clear to see and manage. But you can see right here, part of our edge protection for winter is having these cover crops in. And the idea is in another month, these should be at least another foot high and really bordering the whole perimeter. We have it on the back edge too, maybe just not as thick, but that should create a nice frost protection for some of these things like the mountain papaya. There's a cherimoya seedling under there. Anything else over here? We've got more of the French sorrel. We've got a macadamia seedling, below some kale. The fig doesn't mind the frost. There's a kowhai, a native tree. There's an avocado seed. And that's the idea, is that each of these layers vertically, and also this outside edge of the Mexican sunflower and the cover crop, should go at least a degree of helping protect things from the frost. But we will see. At the moment it looks hopeful, but we haven't had any seriously cold temperatures yet. So because it's still really early, we're trialing a lot of different support species. Here's a different variety of acacia. We've got some poplar in the ground. We're looking at sugarcane right here, which actually was a bit more frost tolerant than I was expecting, compared to a lot of the other things that really got pretty wilted over last winter. It's nice to see a good amount of pups on the bananas now. Some of those will have to get split off in the spring. That's all good. The tamarillos have rebounded really nicely after getting smashed by the frost last year. They were a bit slower to wake up. Even the pineapple grew back though. Even the pineapple was totally obliterated, just got absolutely smoked. Has come back nicely, and then you can see a pup back there actually as well. And we're still finding space for annuals. I think this is Cos lettuce, and it's getting as much sunlight as it needs. It's got a good amount of organic material. You can see a lot of this organic material is just getting dropped into the tree line from our support trees, the eucalypts and the tree lucerne and some of the grasses. We're using bana grass as you saw in the backyard system. There's some guavas down there. There's probably more cherimoyas than like you'd imagine. There's just things all over the place, but it's hard to see that because most of what we're looking at is just really dense protective vegetation. So this right here is one of the avocados that was already existing in the system. It was one of those seedlings that was planted by the previous owner when we moved here about 3 years ago, and it was really small, no shelter, just getting absolutely swamped in kikuyu. And so that was part of the inspiration for creating these agroforestry rows, was something to kind of help protect and save these avocados while they're still young. And they've rebounded so well, they've responded really, really nicely to that. And so I'm excited to have them as a bit of a foundation incorporated into these agroforestry rows. So you can see in this new agroforestry row, everything is a bit shorter, but we went a lot higher density with things. You can see the eucalypts are only every few meters here, same with the acacias or the tree lucerne. It's not super high density with the support trees, which is maybe why so many things got frosted last year. So that's why the next iteration from this year was to plant a really high density of support trees. And so what that looked like was planting a tree lucerne here, skip a meter, a tree lucerne here, skip a meter, and a tree lucerne. And we did the same thing with the eucalypts in between each of those. So those are offset every half meter, tree lucerne, eucalypt on the north edge. So that's where all the protection is coming from sunlight and from, extreme weather events. On the in the midline is where you'll find a lot of the fruit trees. You can see there's a cherimoya, there's a loquat, there's a white sapote. You can keep going and see guava, cherimoya. You can go down the line. There's ice cream beans in here as well. Last winter was a bit of a shock for me to see how intense the frost was and how much it absolutely just smoked the bananas. But going into this next winter, I'm a lot more confident seeing how well the bananas can come back after that, can respawn. And I'm thinking that year after year, things are only becoming more resilient, only becoming more frost hardy, and the microclimate is only developing even more, right? So even, especially back here, the furthest south where it's the most protected, I'm really thinking that there's going to be a lot less frost back here, kind of in the back most sheltered areas of the food forest, and that's actually where we have some of the really interesting things that I don't really want to get frosted. There's some really nice papaya varieties back here. That's my thought, is that because each of these papayas, they came back, right? This papaya came back from getting absolutely smoked last winter. It came back up from the ground, but now there's a bit more of a microclimate. You can see there's an actual eucalypt every 1.5 meters here. This one's a bit dwarfed, so I'm gonna cut that one out next year. But there's eucalypts up here in the canopy now, creating that microclimate, and there's some depth to it as well. When you move forward, there's 1, 2, and a developing third row to shelter from any of that incoming cold weather. So I'm excited to see how this winter does. I'm expecting things to get frosted. One pattern I'm enjoying is the sugarcane on the end of the rows as well, as a bigger clump. Yeah, I'm excited though. We'll see how smoked things get in winter, but until then we still probably get a little bit more, maybe a few more weeks of growth until then. Who knows, or it could be tomorrow. We do have a cold snap coming in, so we shall see. So the raspberries are just finishing up their second crop of the season. The mulberries are doing really well. This is just a cutting that was put in the ground in spring, like a really small cutting, just stick it in the ground. And this whole thing has just shot up really nicely to take the place of something else that I accidentally cut down here. And one of the avocados actually died. So there was 4 avocados here originally. This one was the smallest, always struggling. It died. I also accidentally cut a Paulownia down. So that is beginning to take that space really nicely while the Paulownia resprouts. So while it's not a long-term species, the tree lucerne is one that I'm really excited about because it really can take a pretty good prune from what I've seen, and it has the opportunity to create a really nice canopy. Being the nitrogen fixing tree, you can create the shape to how you want it. And so I'm excited about this coming year, because at the moment these are all really bushy and it's kind of hard to see what's happening, but in spring I'll come through and really give a really heavy-handed chop and drop to a lot of these to let that light in and bring that organic material down. You can see here's some of the early frost damage already on some of these leaves, but nothing major. It's really just the old leaves, the horizontal ones. I'm noticing the vertical leaves that are still popping out aren't catching any of that frost, but even still, things are looking pretty good. I'm excited to see how this shelter of tree lucerne at a really high density does, because in spring I'm going to come through and all of these tree lucerne that kind of blur all this together and make it look like a hedge, they're all going to get a really heavy intervention, really heavy chop to let a lot of light in, bring the material down, and get a really nice growth pulse into the system. That's the high density agroforestry systems. They're ending their second season aside from this newest row, which is finishing its first season. Let's go check out the low density area, and we'll just walk over there now. Basically, this is an area where we've interplanted existing mandarins that are maybe 10 years old. Hard to know, they were planted by the previous owner, but you can see here behind me now, we've got the interplanting happening with the bananas. These were planted as like totally neglected corms in spring, basically just putting them in, didn't give them hardly any love. It's a really low maintenance area, and because of that they did get swamped with the kikuyu during the growing season, which stunted them for sure. And basically that meant 1 or 2 big chops during the year of all the kikuyu, because the access ways are mowed, right? It's still a functioning orchard, has regular mowing and harvesting, and so basically the edges in between the trees, instead of getting mowed across as well, was left, because I don't want to mow over the bananas now. So we had to come through, Lara and I, with the rice knives and basically just chopping huge amounts of the kikuyu, which is great organic material, especially if you can get onto it early in the season. And that's still, it's accelerating succession. Like Scott Hall says, it's all about your grass management in the first few years. And so we are chopping that grass, we are adding it down, putting it in the tree rows, we're putting it around the high value trees. We'll go see another area where we're doing it at a little bit of an earlier stage. But so far these are establishing pretty well for the neglect that they're getting. I'm excited to see how they do next year. Each of them are paired with a eucalypt. I think 1 of them or 2 of them might have died that I've had to replant. But these are the Nitens variety, really straight growing, really fast. One of the favorites that we're seeing. So banana, Nitens in between the 2 mandarins. And some of them just grow way faster than the others. This was planted on that same mission, but it's decided to be 2.5 meters tall instead of the 1 to 2 meters over here. So just little differences like that, little observations to make. Another tree lucerne, started planting those probably 2.5 years ago at the latest. And so here's that 4th series of systems that I forgot to introduce at the beginning. Basically, this is the lowest maintenance area. There were some citrus grafted seedlings that we put in the ground, and they were put in the ground about 2 years ago, but a lot of them have been struggling with the kikuyu pressure. And so what we've done is we've decided to just do a really simple agroforestry system. Sorry for the road noise. Basically just decided to do a really low maintenance system here by planting bananas and high density of eucalypts. And you can see they're about every meter or so, different varieties. We've got the Nitens, Ovata, Gunei, some other ones that we're trialing just to see, because we don't know that we've picked the right one for the area. So we're just trying, we're trying as many as we can get our hands on. And so this has been really simple, just grass management a couple times during the season, just put it in the tree line, build the soil, because eventually we'll come in either next season or the season after that and we'll fill in with higher density things once the succession is a bit higher, once there's a bit more organic material ready for us. So here's a sneaky 5th bonus system that was actually just planted last week, right in time for the rains. It's a bit more of a Mediterranean system, and somebody asked me a question on Instagram, how I decide between where a Mediterranean system versus a temperate versus subtropical system goes. A lot of that has to do with long-term light into the system, conditions, and what existing plants are already in that area, because that's kind of become context, and now you don't want to go and put a bunch of subtropical things around what an existing plum tree already is, if you wanted to keep the plum tree alive and productive and happy. So this area was already blood oranges and 2 blood oranges on the end and an apricot in the middle, the young one. And these were planted about between 1 year and 2 years ago. And again, same thing, struggling with the kikuyu. And so we've gone in, added a really dense line of basically successional agroforestry. There's low succession things to kickstart that organic material accumulation. They're accumulators basically. There's willows, there's sugarcane, there's poplar, there's Queensland arrowroot, there's mulberries, there's sage, there's all sorts of really cool stuff. There's some society garlic in here that we've just put in, and raspberries. So interesting system here. I'm excited to watch this one develop through winter and especially in spring. Yeah, that's about 10 meters long noose. Basically, that's what I'm realizing is I'm doing a lot more small systems rather than huge ones, because now with the small systems you can still get a lot of learnings, but then you can make faster and other similar iterations, but it feels like you can learn and apply your learnings quicker when you're doing smaller iterations rather than huge massive installations. Just my 2 cents, because I've got limited space. It doesn't feel super limited because there's a lot of areas that I have yet to plant out and to kind of go in with more diversity, but at the same time I want to take a slow approach. I want to do the proper learnings. I want to take the seasons to really get familiar with what species work well and how, and just understanding the dynamics a little bit more than I do now. I'm only still about 2.5 years into this. I only started learning about permaculture in the first place like 3.5 years ago, coming from a background of environmental science and ecology, which has helped. The ecology background has really been pretty foundational to a lot of this stuff, and that was my favorite thing about learning about successional agroforestry or syntropic agroforestry with permadynamics, was that it really connected that dot in a way that the PDC courses didn't. The PDC courses taught you about food forests, the different layers, but it never taught, in my experience, it didn't teach about how to incorporate succession, which is like ecological succession. That's just happening. That's that's ecology. It didn't combine ecology with food forests, and that's where syntropic agroforestry, Ernst Gotch, Permadynamics, Agroforestry Academy, Scott Hall, who else? There's so many really cool people. There's Matt Reese in Florida, What's Ripening. There's some really cool projects happening all around, really cool people that we're having discussions with. A lot of those discussions are happening on our Instagram page. On lives, we're doing a series at the moment called Agroforestry Chats, where a couple times a week we'll meet up with people on Instagram Live and have a really cool discussion with them about whatever they're doing agroforestry wise. So we've had some really great conversations, and there's a lot lined up. So if you're interested in longer format conversations around agroforestry all over the world, different projects, how people approach things, and that sort of stuff, go check out the Instagram. That's happening. We have one today, we have one in a few days, so jump on there. There's some really great people chatting to learn from, and yeah, hope you enjoyed the tour. That was just a quick update. What's today? May 20th, 2022. Prepping for the frost. Things are looking great after their second season of growth. Some of the areas where we just planted this year are still looking great. Definitely expecting to get smoked by the frost, so that's going to happen. We'll update you when it does. Sorry I haven't been more active on here. I said that I would. I haven't uploaded. I said the last video that I uploaded was a year ago, and then I was like, yeah, I'm going to start doing this a lot more often. Well, finally getting around to recording something that I feel is worthy of putting up. So, but most of the content's on Instagram, some on Facebook. So if you're really hungry for it, go check it out there. But for some of this long format stuff, I'll stick it here. So hope you enjoyed. Any other questions you guys have, whether it's about, touring the nursery, there's the air prune propagation stuff, just let me know, and because I want to be here to make the content that you guys are going to find valuable. So hope you enjoyed. Until next time, peace out, keep growing things, have a great day.